Hi YouTube, this is Evie. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. This time I'm going to be talking about middles. Now, if you're new to this channel, hi, hello, welcome. But if you are not new to this channel, you probably know that I have done a couple of videos now talking about ADDL, play, DDLG, littles, all of that stuff. Links down below if you haven't seen those videos yet. Something that I haven't really mentioned in those videos before are middles. There's a few reasons for that. One is I think it definitely deserves its own video because it's different enough that I think it deserves talking about on its own. So this is what this is. Also, there doesn't really seem to be a lot of information out there about middles. When I was researching for this video, I was really only able to find a couple of blog posts and some stuff on Tumblr, but besides that, there's not really a lot of good information out there about middles. So basically what this video is it's a combination of stuff that I've gotten from online, stuff that I've gotten from classes I've taken, and then information I've gotten from friends and people I know that are middles or who do middle type scenes or have middle relationships or have had them in the past. So keep in mind during this video that I am not myself personally into DDLG or age play or ABDL or any of that stuff. I do not personally have any experience. I do think I know enough and I've got enough information from other people that are involved with it that I can make sort of an introductory video. It's not supposed to be a video talking about the one true way to be a middle. It's not meant to be a complete and total guide. This is really just meant to be a basic overview. So if you are a little or a middle, I don't talk about something you think is really important in this video, or my definitions are just really, really wrong, or whatever, feel free to put that down below in the comment section. I am not an expert about any of this. I do not try to pretend like I am. This is really just an introduction, and hopefully if I do get anything wrong, I will be corrected in the comments, and I can amend this as such. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started with the video. So I'm going to be kind of breaking this up into a few sections as best that I can and try not to turn this into a 15-minute long video. Basically, what I'm going to be talking about is what is a middle, how is a middle different from being a little, different types of scenes that you can do as a middle, different types of activities that you can do, different sort of tropes or archetypes there are of different types of middles, and then kind of sprinkled throughout there different examples of things that you can try, different explanations and motivations that you can do, or reasons why people enjoy being middle, and hopefully that should be everything. Now, number one, what is a middle? Middle is somebody who, in the context of a BDSM relationship, because middles and all that stuff is related to BDSM, takes on the role, behaviors, actions, etc. of somebody who is roughly middle to high school aged. Generally, this is correlated to between 12 and 17, but that's not necessarily a definite number. Age play, a lot of times people will specifically go back to exact ages, like say 12 or 16 or something like that. Whereas with being a middle, like being a little, it's generally more about taking on things from a particular age range rather than sticking to one specific age. So somebody who is a middle may have interests or behaviors that correlate both being 12 years old and with being 17. That is totally okay and that is perfectly fine. That is just how it happens. Now, sometimes people do stick a lot closer to a specific age, but that is by no means a requirement for being a middle or a little. Now, what makes this different from being a little? I think the key things are going to be, one, the age range people are when they're doing little play versus doing middle play. And then secondly, the kinds of activities and different behaviors that people engage in. So a little is somebody who is generally between, say, 3 and 9 years old. Again, that's not really a set in stone age. There's kind of a gray area between being a middle and being a little when you start getting into being 9, 10, 11. But that can really go either way, and that's going to depend on your personal preference and your own personal relationships. Every little is somebody who's going to be preschool or elementary school age. Now, I'm not entirely sure personally if I would consider being an infant the same as being a little. That's not really going to be relevant for this particular video, and we'll talk about that another time, I'm sure. As I mentioned earlier, the activities you're going to be doing as a middle are going to be distinct from being a little. So I'm going to kind of combine what makes being a little and a middle different with the kinds of activities you can do as a middle. So, for example, if you are a little, you likely do things like coloring, watching cartoons, you probably have all of your meals prepared for you. You might wear things like onesies or long pajamas. You may have interest in things like younger Disney movies or picture books, having story time, having a set bedtime, being bathed, things along that line. I think being a middle, the kind of care and attention you receive is going to be a lot more focused and all-encompassing because when you are a parent of a 3-year-old, you're probably never really taking your eyes off of them for about 5 seconds because you can do a lot of crazy things in about 5 seconds. Whereas with being a middle, I think there's a lot more focus on being young, but still having some independence, having more choices and more say in what you do, having a better way to articulate your needs and being more exacting in the kinds of things that you are allowed to do, and having a lot wider range of interests because you have more autonomy and more leeway in the kinds of things that you are able to do. So, for the kinds of things that middles can do and types of scene ideas and activities and everything, I'm going to kind of break that into 2 more categories. So, first, I'm going to be talking about non-sexual things you can do, and then I'm going to be talking about the sexual things. So, if you don't want to watch the sexual things, please feel free to just skip that section. I'm going to be covering non-sexual stuff. As I said before, there's a lot of things you can do as a middle because you have more autonomy and you have more knowledge. So when you're playing as an older age, just your whole world opens up for all kinds of things that you can do. So you can do things like dye your hair. You could be fascinated with piercings and tattoos. Maybe you're obsessed with boy bands or K-pop. Maybe you're really, really into fashion. Maybe you're really experimental with your makeup. Maybe you love reading magazines. Maybe you're really interested in manga or anime. You're kind of a weeaboo almost. Maybe you're really nerdy and you really like playing D&D. And you love reading like YA novels and young adult type anime or manga. There's all different kinds of TV shows you could be into. You could be into Gilmore Girls, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, some things I hate about you, Mean Girls. Like there's tons of stuff like that. Dawson's Creek, all of that you can be totally into as a middle. Maybe you are really like artsy and nerdy and you sort of have taken that like fascination with coloring books a lot of middles have, and maybe you're really into like sketching and doodling and drawing. So there's a ton of activities you can do out there that are non-sexual. You can also do very bratty type things as a middle as well. I'll get more into this a bit later on in the video, I think. But being angsty, having a lot of hormones, being moody because you are coming into your adulthood, but you're still having a lot of rules and restrictions on what you can do, lends itself really, really well to a bratty type of energy, and it's going to come out in a very different way than if you were a little. So if you're a little, you'll probably do things like your daddy will tell you, like, time for a bath, little one, and then you go, no, and then you'll run off, and you'll run down the hallway and try to get away from him, and then I'll scoop you up and toss you in the bathtub. Maybe don't actually toss them in the bathtub, but you know what I mean. Whereas with a middle, maybe you are playing video games and you are running late for dinner and your dom is downstairs and is like, "Oh, lady, it's time for dinner." And you're like, "No, I don't want to eat dinner." And you slam your door and you continue to play video games until they come upstairs to discipline you. So there's a lot of different ways you can take being a brat as a middle. You also can be a middle and not be a brat at all. You can be more service oriented. You can combine it with pet play if you want to. Like, you don't have to be a brat at all as a middle, but I think kind of playing with that angst and that moodiness does tend to steer a lot of brats towards identifying as middle as compared to a lot of other different kinds of kinks and BDSM dynamics. So like I mentioned earlier, this is going to be where I talk about the sexual part of being a middle. So if that part makes you uncomfortable, please feel free to skip until this part of the video. But I'm going to be talking about the sexual stuff now, so you've been fairly warned. I hope this is not something you want to hear discussed. But a lot of the reasons why people are drawn towards being a middle and are drawn towards this type of play is they want to feel what it's like to have their first sexual experiences again. And it can kind of be rewriting what your own past was like. So, for example, if you were somebody who didn't really maybe have that great of a first sexual experience or didn't do any sexual experimentation at all when you were middle and high school, you want to kind of play out what maybe that would have been like if you had been more aware of your own sexuality at that age, you can do that. Maybe you are very like provocative and you're always trying to go out wearing like the shortest skirts that you can and trying to dress, way older than you are. So you could be 25 pretending to be a 6-year-old, pretending to dress like a 25-year-old. You can have it go kind of pretty meta almost there in a lot of ways. But you can do things like being very provocative and like sexual and discovering your sexuality and being really fascinated with sex. It's a little bit hard for me to like personally try and explain this because I'm not in the middle and 2, I'm also ace. So like a lot of this is kind of a foreign concept to me, but I'm trying my best to explain it. But basically, you're going through and you're rediscovering your sexuality for the first time, or you're hearing what it was like, to go through and pretend, the like first time you had sex, when you were like really, really like horny all the time, your like hormones were in control of everything that you did. You can do a lot of different stuff with being sexual when you are in the middle. Like I said earlier, you can take this in direction of maybe you didn't have a good positive first experience with sex. You're kind of having a do-over. You can also do it the opposite way. Maybe you did actually have like a lot of good experimentation when you were in high school, or maybe you waited until you were older and you were fine with that. Maybe you want to go back and pretend and play out kind of like rape fantasies or ravishment fantasies. And this is not a place for judgment, FYI. Those kinds of kinks and those kinds of fetishes are really, really common. So they are controversial, and you want to be delicate when you play with them, especially if you want to do them in public in any way, shape, or form. You can totally have that be a thing with your kink. You can totally do that in a DDMG or any kind of middle-oriented BDSM dynamic. So last thing I want to talk about here are different archetypes. You can be different kinds of tropes you can play on while being a middle. Really common right off the bat is going to be schoolgirl type stuff. So being a middle schooler or a high schooler, usually there's a lot here involving uniform, and this can kind of even go into 2 different directions. One is going to be like the bad, naughty schoolgirl. Like the one who is always corrupting all of her friends and like convincing them to like smoke cigarettes out back at school, or getting them to skip class earlier or sneak out the back door at night away from their parents. You can play that kind of like bad girl, like very, I don't necessarily want to say, like kind of every like bad influence kid at school, especially if you were the kind of kid who was the goody two shoes when they were actually that age and you're going back and having a do over at that. You can also have it be where you're like a very like innocent, pious Catholic schoolgirl and you're being corrupted by somebody who's older in your life, or maybe you're being corrupted by one of the bad girls I just mentioned. And you can also have stuff where you really, really embrace the sort of moodiness and angst you had when you were a teenager or a middle schooler. So you can have things like maybe you just lock the door and you just listen to music as loudly as possible. Stuff you listened to when you were younger, like 3 Days Grace or Green Day, or things maybe your parents don't let you listen to when you were younger. Maybe you're really into video games and you're really like introverted and quiet and you do things like draw and read and do stuff like that. Maybe you don't fit any of those things, and maybe rather than necessarily being like a bad influence, you're more of a mean girl type of person, where you're sort of you're really into dressing up to the nines and like makeup, and you're kind of like catty, and maybe even like you talk back to your parents a lot. I think this plays a lot on kind of more princessy, bratty, submissive types of play. You can go into there, and especially if you're the kind of person who got bullied by those kinds of kids when you were actually that age, it might be good to kind of walk in their shoes and kind of, figure out what it's like, maybe what if you did that this time around, Another thing you can do is maybe, like I mentioned earlier, like really boy obsessed. Like you read like all of like the preteen magazines, read 17, you're constantly reading like, tips for how to have your first kiss, or how do you know if he likes you type quizzes. Maybe you are very much into anime, manga, you're into J-fashion, you're just like completely obsessed with like Final Fantasy and K-pop bands and all of that stuff. So you can kind of take this in a lot of different directions if you want to. You can mix and match all of these things. Maybe you don't fit any of these tropes at all. That's perfectly fine. I just really wanted to give some examples here, guys. I don't necessarily want to turn this into a video where I list off every single activity that you could possibly do as a middle. Generally speaking, besides what I talked about earlier, you're going to be doing things that allow you to have a bit more autonomy than if you were little. So maybe you're learning how to drive. Maybe you enjoy shopping and going to the mall. Maybe you have your daddy or your mommy buy you presents. Maybe you go on dates or are really flirty and provocative. There's a good link list type thing that I'll put down below that I found when I was doing research for this video that gives a bunch of examples of things you could do as a middle. So please do check that out if you want more suggestions for that kind of thing. I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. If you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to put that down below. If you did like this video, please give it a thumbs up so I know. If you want to see more and you haven't already, please do subscribe. And if you want to support this channel, I would highly recommend checking out my Patreon, which you can find linked down below. And toast yourself, get rest your day, and then get rest your week.